Hey, everybody. Today we are going to be talking about chapter 1 in the text, which is about choices in relationships. And so our learning objectives for today are going to include, sorry about that, just this discussion around choices in relationships, right? And developing an understanding that the relationships that we have in our lives are a result of our choices, and we're going to talk about what are some influences on those choices. We're also going to talk about theoretical frameworks, particularly in regards to marriage and family, different types of marriage, different types of families, definitions of family relationships. And then we're going to end with just a brief overview of research in the field of family studies, and talk a little bit about what that research looks like, and then some challenges to research in this area. So when we think about choices in relationships, it's important to recognize first and foremost that not making a choice is a choice in and of itself. For example, if you are sexually active and you decide or don't decide to use a condom, then you have made a decision to increase your risk of unwanted pregnancy and potentially exposure to STIs. And so, not deciding on something in this regard is, in essence, making a decision. Another important understanding about choices in relationships is that choices have to include action. So making a decision doesn't change anything. It is the action towards your choice that has to follow that is really impactful. So related to the previous example that I just gave, if you decide to only have safe sex, then actions that have to follow that are being responsible to purchase condoms, to have them available, and to use them during sexual encounters. It's also important to understand that choices involve trade-offs. So often by making one choice, you are relinquishing another choice. An example of that: deciding to marry someone means that you're giving up your freedom to pursue other relationships as a trade-off for a secure, committed relationship most of the time, right? We are going to talk about some committed relationships that maybe that isn't an implicit or explicit norm. But for the most part, people understand that, the decision to marry is often a commitment to be exclusive and monogamous. We also have to understand that choices might require correction. So saying that I often use in my own life is that if I make a choice and I don't like it, I can make a new choice. Sometimes, we find ourselves going down a path that doesn't work for us for whatever reason, particularly in regards to relationships and family circumstances, right? And so we might have to self-correct and make a new decision. And that's kind of the beauty of life, is that we get to do that. Another point regarding choices in relationship is that our point of view matters. So this is an idea that's about choosing to look on the bright side, to find the lessons that life affords us through relationships with other people, and being willing to sort of fail forward. It's also understanding that some choices are in fact irrevocable. That example that I used first about safe sex, if you do end up in an unwanted pregnancy situation, that carries implications for you for the rest of your life, no matter how that scenario plays out, right? So it is important to recognize that, while we do want to hold this notion of flexibility in our choices and being able to learn from our mistakes, that there are certain choices that carry, super weighty consequences. The text points out that Generation Y, also referred to as millennials, have some sort of significant trends in terms of choices in relationships. Those include a focus on enjoyment and flexibility in relationships, as well as in work and life. Millennials tend not to be fixated on marriage, but they are instead sort of in this trend of hanging out, hooking up, and or living together. And those are ideas that we're going to actually spend a good bit of time talking about in a later chapter. Technology plays a huge role in the relationships of millennials in particular, but really in all generations at this point. My dad's 76 now, and he is on Facebook with the best of them. So choices around technology really impact all of our lives at this point. We have to make choices around sexting and texting, and do we limit that to current partners? Do we communicate electronically or digitally with previous partners? Use of social networking and social media sites is a huge area for choice. And also parental concerns like vlogging, video blogging of daily life activities. Are you going to censor children's internet content and experiences? Those are some examples of choices that we have to make regarding relationships and families around technology. And then it's important to just recognize that the choices that we make throughout our course of life are often dependent upon the life stage or the family life cycle stage, such as in newly married couples, couples in their childbearing years, couples in their retirement years, or singles in their retirement years. All of these different, points in time in the lifespan have a different impact or influence on the choices that one might make. Other influences on choices in relationships include globalization and social structures. So the idea of globalization is this sense that economic, political, and religious happenings throughout the world affect what happens in a marriage and family in the United States. I think that we're living in a time where we can clearly see that the global pandemic, COVID-19, and also the current social and political climate in the US are prime examples of how globalization has an impact at the macro level on sort of the micro experience of an individual or a family. Social structures include institutions such as the family, marriage. And these are institutions in our society because they're recognized by the government in terms of tax deductions for parents, family-friendly work policies. Other institutions include the economy, our education system, religions, and our government itself is an institution, right? Institutions then are made up of social groups. Social groups are defined as two or more people who share a common identity, who interact with one another and develop a social relationship. Some examples from your own life might include your family, your roommates. Those are primary social groups, right? And then secondary social groups, an example of that is this class that we're in together. You may know a few people personally. Most likely you won't know too many people in here outside of just the relationship that we have in this course. But it is still a social group that you find yourself situated in. It becomes important to consider status within a social group as well. So these exist within groups like families, and they largely define our social identity. Father, mother, child, teen, single person, divorcee, widow. These are all labels that sort of carry with them a status within the group of family or society. Also, socioeconomic and minority status can have implications for position or rights, roles, obligations within a social group. Every status is associated with some set of rights or obligations, which are referred to as roles. An example of this is that when spouses choose to marry one another, they adopt a new set of roles and obligations that accompany that new commitment to one another as a partner or spouse for life. And then there's research brought out in the text that speaks specifically to socioeconomic and minority status in terms of connection to and lower use of technology, right? So this can have outcomes on folks from lower socioeconomic backgrounds or minority backgrounds, in that if they don't have access to or are not comfortable using technology, this can have implications for their education and job opportunities, as well as how they relate to others, right? Because oftentimes in our world today, we connect with one another through technology. And so if that's limited for someone, it does have impacts on their sort of life at large. Other influences on choices include a person's culture, their family of origin, their own personality, and then, as I just spoke to, their experiences with social media and technology. Specifically related to culture, I want to talk for a minute about beliefs and values. So beliefs are our definitions or our explanations of what is true in this life. And then based on those, we hold values that are our standards regarding what's good and bad, what's right and wrong, etc. A way that I have seen this show up in my own life recently is that I hold a personal belief and value that young children need a fair amount of unstructured free time to engage in free choice, exploratory play, and those kinds of activities. But our society seems to hold a value and a belief that children should be, largely involved in extracurriculars, right? So you often hear of 7-year-olds who are doing gymnastics, piano lessons, soccer, sometimes a whole lot more than that all at once. And so I have to strike this balance between holding true to what I believe is important for my own child, and also making sure that she's situated comfortably within the societal norm of, being involved in extracurricular activities. Another concept that is, really based on culture is this idea of individualism. So individualism is the notion that the choices that we make are beneficial to us as an individual. And that's contrasted in the text against this idea of familialism, which is really the idea that rather than making choices based on your own personal needs and interests, that you would make decisions more for the good of the family unit, right? And then some cultures, not the US, but other cultures, particularly in the East, hold more of a value on this idea of collectivism, right? So that is a concept that really, instead of making choices for the good of the individual or even for the good of the family, that we're making choices for the good of the group and for our collective culture. I just want to take a minute to define family of origin, sometimes referred to as family of orientation, because we're going to talk about this more throughout our course, but family of origin or orientation is really just the family that you're born into, right? And I think it's probably pretty clear for anyone closely connected to their family of origin how our family plays a part in our relationship choices. Happily married parents, for example, are going to help to define your concepts of love and marriage. It's also documented in the research that teenagers from homes with a unstable background or where divorce is the situation, that these children are often more prone to delinquent behaviors. Other family relationships like sibling relationships and family values, such as a family's level of openness, which we're going to talk about more later, These are also related to individuals' relationship choices. Personality types, are you an introvert, an extrovert? Are you passive, assertive? Again, it's pretty clear how these type of temperament would relate to choices in regards to relationships. And then social media, or your level of connectedness with the virtual world, is going to impact your relationships. So in one regard, I already mentioned that there was existing research that decreased use of technology might negatively impact the way that a person can stay in touch with others or, connect to others. But it's also important to understand that there's research out there that suggests the opposite, right? That increased use of social media is actually related to lower relationship satisfaction. There's a time factor there where if you are spending, a significant amount of time on the internet, then that's less time that you have available to spend with your partner. And then there's also this idea of the comparison game, right? So if we are always seeing the highlight reel from everyone else's life and their romantic relationships or family relationships on social media, there's this tendency to sort of compare, and really most people and the research out there suggests that our lives don't measure up in terms of how we compare to other people's lives that we see online. And so it's really not just lower satisfaction in terms of relationship status, but lower life satisfaction and overall well-being is related to high uses of social media. So that's just something to be aware of when you think about your own choices around those issues. So now we're going to shift gears just a little bit and talk about some theoretical frameworks that help us understand relationships and committed relationships, marriages, partnerships, in terms of how they function, right? So the first one that I want to talk about is the social exchange theory. And this is a theory that views interactions and choices in terms of cost and benefit, or cost and profit, right? So this comes out of the idea of utilitarianism, which is a theory that individuals rationally weigh rewards and costs of their behavior choices. An example of this is spouses negotiating the division of labor within a relationship, right? So you might see in a marriage that one person is primarily focused on the children and homemaking, while the other person is focused more on external work and earning an income. And just this understanding of costs and benefits is kind of one understanding of how couples might come to that type of arrangement. It works for one and it works for the other in a sort of opposite and beneficial way. Another theoretical framework that we're going to discuss is the family life course development theory. I've already touched on this in terms of talking about different points in the family life cycle or family life course. I said newly married couples, couples in retirement, those are examples of this theory. And the family life cycle is really just a concept that stresses family members' developmental tasks that occur across time, right? So an example of this at the newly married couple point in the family life cycle is the breaking away from the family of origin and the creation of a new type of family, which we're going to touch on, is called a family of procreation, right? And so there are these shifts and changes that happen across our lifespan that are directly related to where we are in the life course. Another theoretical framework is called structure function. And a question posed kind of based on this theory is, how do marriage and family contribute to our society at large? Some ideas are families replenish societies with socialized members, right? Parents raising children, that's kind of the end goal, is to send them back out into the world as fully functioning and contributing members to society. Family structure also promotes the emotional stability of its members, right? So the family unit is, when it's working well, is a sort of envelope, enclosure around an individual that can buffer them from outside stressors. It can help promote coping mechanisms. It provides a level of emotional support, right? And also a level of economic support. So two people choosing to partner in life and, cohabitate or raise children, there are financial benefits to that arrangement, right? Economic benefits. There's also a theory called conflict theory. And this is a theory that views individuals in relationships as actually competing for valuable resources like time, money, and power. So this is sort of a converse way of looking at that same idea that we just talked about in terms of economic and financial experiences for individuals in relationships, right? This theory posits that family members have different goals and values, and that this can create conflict. It's not necessarily intended to be viewed as a bad, negative, or a positive in the relationship. It's just a natural part of relationships, right? And so sometimes it can create negative outcomes, but sometimes this type of conflict or competition for valuable resources creates positive outcomes. I can think of some examples from my own life where this has shown up kind of in both regards. And so I would encourage you to reflect on this theory and see if you can also think of examples where relating to other people created conflict in your own relationship or in your own experience. Jealousy in a relationship is an example of this conflict theory. Mate selection is also another example, right? So I think we can see through those two examples how there could be potentially negative or positive outcomes. But again, conflict theory is really just included here to draw your attention to the fact that it is a natural part of relating to other people. Another theory is symbolic interaction, which is basically this idea that marriage and families are symbolic worlds in which the members assign meaning to each other's behaviors, right? So I'm going to give you an example to kind of imagine with me. You're at a party and you lock eyes for 3 seconds with a stranger across the room, right? You are left then to sort of ponder, and I can pretty much guarantee that the person across the room is also pondering, was that an invitation for me to go over and talk to them? Was that an approach? Are they flirting with me? Or am I misinterpreting this completely and it was just an awkward moment where we locked eyes across the room? Those type of experiences can be better understood when we are relating to one another in some way, right? So if that happens with my husband, I'm going to have a different experience than what I have with the stranger at the party, right? And that is called defining situations. So how we define situations happens within this context of symbolic interaction. Another concept related to symbolic interaction is what's called the looking glass self. This is a psychological term, and it basically just means that our image of ourselves is a reflection of what other people tell us about ourselves, right? So we develop an idea of who we are in relation to the feedback that we get from other people. An example from my own life is that I like to think sometimes that I'm funny because people in my experience often kind of chuckle at my clever quips. And so that impacts how I interact with people, right? When I'm uncomfortable, when I'm in new situations, sometimes when I'm in difficult situations, I use humor as a way to make myself feel more relatable or to feel more comfortable in those social situations. Another idea is called the self-fulfilling prophecy. And this is just basically that my definition of any given situation, or my definition of my looking glass self, right? How I understand myself in relation to other people is going to inform how I behave, interact, and sort of how I am within any given situation. And then the last concept related to this theory is the idea of taking the role of other, right? Empathy is an idea that is really related to our coping mechanisms and our overall relationship satisfaction. And empathic responses are often, cultivated and developed within the relationships that we find ourselves situated in. Another theory is the family systems theory. This views each member of a family as part of a system, and the family is a unit itself. I touched on earlier when I said macro and meso, I'm sorry, micro, I said macro and micro systems. That is a separate theory that's kind of related to this family systems theory. That's Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory, which recognizes that not only is each member of the family situated within this system of the family, but that the family unit itself is located within these greater systems, right? So our social groups, our families, extended families, our schools, those are all examples of the kind of exosystem theory. And then, at a more macro level, we've got politics and culture and all of those types of things. But basically what you need to know about family systems is that within every family, there are these norms of interaction, right? I think of monogamy and being a committed partner normally as kind of an implicit norm of interaction within a relationship, right? So when you enter into a sort of committed relationship with another person, this is often an expectation that you don't really have to discuss. It's kind of just a norm that tends to often be implicit. It's very important within the family system to have explicit norms as well, right? So rules that need to be flexible and change over time, but that often have to be sort of explicitly stated, right? So if I want my 4 and 7-year-old children to understand that they can play outside, but they may not leave our yard, I have to teach them that. That's an explicit norm that we establish in our home, right? And then an example of how that needs to change over time is that that is appropriate for my 4 and 7-year-old, but it wouldn't be appropriate for my 15 and 18-year-old children, right? So these have to be flexible. Another concept related to family systems is the idea of boundaries within the family, right? So boundaries can include actual physical boundaries, such as a closed bedroom or bathroom door in the home, being, a signal that the person in the other room is asking for privacy. Or these can be more emotional in nature, right? Where we have communication norms in our family. So some families have really kind of warm and affectionate ways of communicating and relating to one another. And some families are more cold and indifferent, and that's just their family norm in terms of communication boundaries. And then there's also this idea of degree of openness. So this is really a family's level of receptiveness to the outside world. Families are very different in this regard. And and often, vary greatly in terms of how much they're willing to take outside information, outside views into the family system. I am kind of going back to human ecology or ecological systems theory, which I just mentioned. But again, this is this idea that families are situated within the bigger picture, right? And so some considerations here are ideas like nutrition, housing. If a family is struggling at those, very basic levels, it's going to impact how they show up in these different systems, right? And so then our values come into play here as well. My primary work background is in the field of education. And so I'll use a value that often shows up in that realm here as an example. So we often sort of hold the value in education that parents should be largely involved in their child's school experience, right? But what happens then when we are working with a family who at this very basic microsystem level is struggling with things like feeding their family or having adequate housing? Again, as I said, that's going to impact, the mom who is out working 2 jobs to try and feed her children can't come to PTA meetings, right? And so we have to understand how families' situations within the bigger systems, sort of impact their experiences, and then, how do we relate to them accordingly? We're almost done talking about theories. I do want to mention feminist theory, which is a theory that views marriage as a context of inequality and oppression for women, right? So sort of in contrast to a lot of the theories that we've touched on so far. And there are 3 kind of primary feminist theories. The first is lesbian feminism, which emphasizes oppressive heterosexuality and the patriarchy, which is the view that our social system is dominated by men in roles of power. There's also psychoanalytical feminism, which focuses on cultural domination of men's phallically oriented ideas and their repressed emotions. And then there's this third feminist theory, which is called the standpoint theory. And this is the idea that neglect of a woman's perspective and experiences in our culture have kind of contributed to women not being as represented in the construction and production of our social knowledge. Again, a way for people to understand ideas of marriage and relationships. And then finally, the couple and family technology theory basically just speaks to the impacts of society to the structure and the processes of families in our society today. And it really emphasizes the need for clear communication around rules and roles in terms of use of technology within the family. So for next class period, I want to make sure that you read up on these theories and that you have a good understanding of the theory itself, and then the basic premise of this theory, because we're going to do a related in-class activity to start our synchronous time together next week. So make sure that you have a kind of a good working understanding of the different theoretical frameworks that we just talked about. Shifting gears now, we are going to talk about marriage as one of those institutions of society that I mentioned before. So some different elements of marriage. Marriage is basically a legal contract between 2 people, right? You enter into it knowingly. The age for marriage is different across different states in the US. And marriage as a social legal contract carries implications with it, right? There's an understanding that when you marry someone, you're going to be sharing property, sharing finances, sharing responsibilities, often sharing benefits that society bestows upon the married, right? Marriage is also an emotional relationship. There was a study done among married adults in the United States, and 93% of those folks stated that love was their top reason for getting married. To me, this is a staggering percentage, and it's probably related in some ways to the high divorce rates that we see in the US, right? Because when I think about that construct of love, I am left with questions like, what actually is love? How do I define love? How do you define love? Is it the same? How do I express love, receive love? There's a lot of kind of gray area, I guess, there. And I think, we hear this idea, love is a choice. But I think there's probably something to that love doesn't always make you feel good and have those warm and fuzzies. And so sometimes, you're in a relationship with someone because that's a choice that you've made for your life, right? Not because of feelings of love all the time. That's just been my experience anyways. Marriage often includes the idea of sexual monogamy. I've spoken about this already. But just to kind of highlight the point, in a study of undergraduates interviewed, 68% of them agreed with this statement: I would divorce a spouse who had an affair. And I think, 68%, again, that's a large majority of people who implicitly agree with this idea of the norm that a married relationship should include sexual monogamy, and most of the time also emotional monogamy, right? Another element of marriage is the legal responsibility for children. So marriage, again, is recognized as this institution within a society because of the ways in which it binds two individuals to nurture and care for young children, right? That relates to some of those theories that we talked about before. It's socially beneficial for our culture to have, children being well taken care of and having their needs met, and then coming back into society as productive members. And then oftentimes there's this idea of public announcement around a marriage, right? So marriage is like a really big deal in terms of the rituals and the ceremonies, and it's kind of a rite of passage in our society and in many cultures. And we'll talk about how that contrasts to singlehood later on. But part of that public acknowledgement of the relationship really just serves to sort of solidify and emphasize partners' commitment to one another. Different types of marriage. You need to be aware of and understand what these terms mean and how they are defined, okay? Polygamy, that's just a generic term for a marriage involving more than two people, all right? And there are a couple different types of polygamy. Polygyny being one of those, which is defined as one husband with multiple wives. There are pockets of polygyny happening in the United States today, often in Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah. And sometimes polygyny is associated with certain religious affiliations. Latter-day Saints and Mormons are an example. Latter-day Saints, also called Mormons, is an example of a religious affiliation that might be related to polygyny. Not always, just sometimes. And so then polyandry is the flip side of that, which is a marriage with one wife and multiple husbands. We see this set up much less often. It's much less common in our society, but it does happen. And then pantagamy is another term to be aware of. And this is really just a formal arrangement among group members where it's basically considered a group marriage. It often happens on communes and sometimes in cults. But it's this idea that, you know, multiple partners are married to multiple partners within a group. So benefits of marriage. Some advantages of being married over staying single include increased economic resources because of that, you know, sharing of financials within the marriage. Greater access to healthcare. Again, there are family-friendly work policies and sort of infrastructural supports at the societal level that recognize marriage and offer benefits to married folks. And then there are also some risks to be aware of, though. The text points out that marriage is associated with obesity, and that often people in unhappy marriages have, you know, less life satisfaction overall, right? So it's good when it's good, but it can be not good when it's not good. Just a little bit more to talk about today, some definitions related to families. So family is basically defined as a kinship system of all relatives either living together or recognized as a social unit, okay? A couple of terms to be aware of. The first is fective kin. And so this is not our family of origin or some of the different types of families that we're going to talk about next. This is family of choice, right? Our fective kin. Civil union is just a term used to define a bonded relationship that is given legal status, right? So a marriage is a type of a civil union. And then there are also domestic partnerships. This is where individuals who have been cohabitating or in relationship for an extended period of time are actually given official recognition to receive partner benefits such as health insurance. Domestic partnerships are the term for that. And so then different types of families. I've already spoken to family of origin or orientation, the family that you come from. I think I've also touched on family of procreation, which represents the family that you will begin should you choose to get married and have children of your own. The concept of nuclear family is an idea that actually shifts over time if you move from family of origin into family of procreation. But it's that situation that you find yourself, you know, immersed in terms of family. So when you're growing up in the home, it's your mom, dad, brother, sister. And now for me, it's my husband and my 2 children living in this home with me. Binuclear is another type of family, and this is a family with members who live in 2 houses, right? 2 households. So if we have a family with divorce, we might see a child situated in a binuclear family situation where they live in one home with mom and, you know, 2 siblings, and then they might live in another home with a dad and a stepmom and other children, right? And so that brings into this picture the idea of blended families, and that's kind of what I just described there, the coming together through marriage of families, you know, from different nuclear backgrounds originally. Extended family is also a term brought out in the book, and you know, we're all pretty familiar with that. That's your grandparents, aunts and uncles, cousins, etc. Traditional family is a term just used to refer to a 2-parent household with husband and wife in those more traditional roles, right? Of husband as kind of the breadwinner and wife as more of the homemaker. The modern family, which I think we probably see much more of this and the postmodern family now. That's a show on TV, right? Modern Family. Modern family is really the dual earner families where you've got both partners working outside the home and kind of having to renegotiate those roles within the home, right, of breadwinner and primary caregiver, because that model doesn't really work for the modern family. And then we also have postmodern families, and this is just a term used to refer to or to encompass same-sex couples, single moms who have chosen never to be married but are raising children on their own, and also polyamorous families, or those families that practice polygamy. Okay, last bit of information to talk about, and I'm not going to spend much time here because I just kind of want to highlight it for you, but research in the field of human services at large is always going to follow this process. You have to first identify your topic or your area of focus. So an example of that is social media use and how it relates to relationship satisfaction, right? You're going to review the literature on those ideas, social media use and relationship satisfaction. And then you're going to develop a hypothesis, right? So the people who discovered these findings probably had some sense that increased or very great use of social media was going to relate negatively to relationship satisfaction. And then it's this process of developing what type of study, what method of data collection are you going to use? Are you going to survey folks? Are you going to conduct interviews? That type of thing. I have it bolded here that you have to get IRB approval in order to conduct research with human subjects, right? And so this IRB is the Institutional Review Board. But it's a pretty involved process that you have to go through in order to use humans as test subjects for any type of research. And this is really just to protect people's privacy and also their experiences emotionally and things like that. And then the next step is to actually collect and then analyze your data, and then the results can be drafted and published. And again, if you spend much time in the field of human services, you're going to have lots of opportunity to either read research, or if you go on into graduate level work, you'll probably be conducting some research in this field on your own. And so you should become very familiar with this process, throughout your academic career. But something to be aware of in terms of, studying and understanding families. And then just to be aware that there are these challenges to human studies or family studies, right? Some examples of these challenges are the lack of an ability to implement a control group because of certain types of research. Sometimes it's unethical to withhold a certain treatment from an individual, or to implement a certain treatment on an individual, right? So you can't do like a traditional experiment with a control group and a treatment group. Sometimes terminology is unclear, like in my example about love. What is love, And so that's going to influence how people respond on a questionnaire or to an interview question related to love. So if you want to know a lot more about these different challenges, there's information on pages 26 and 27 in our book that you can look at. There's a table on page 27 that is particularly useful in terms of helping understand and break these down. And so I would encourage you again to just refer to that a little bit more. And I am going to, hopefully, if I can get it to work, post a link to the course page that includes a video clip about a homeless couple marrying. It's from our textbook online, and I'm not sure if it will let me copy it or not. So if I'm able to do that, I'll have you watch that. It's super quick, and then do some sort of reflection activity on what you see there. If we can't do it asynchronously, then we will we'll visit with that when we come back together in our next synchronous meeting. Okay. So again, before we meet next time, please make sure that you're familiar enough with the different theoretical frameworks to participate in an in-class activity. And then I will see you guys next time we meet. Okay, thank you. Take care.